All right, listener, buckle up, because today we're diving into a question that haunts even the most eloquent among us. Tell me about yourself. We've all been there, right? Palms sweating, mind racing, and suddenly you've forgotten your own name.
It's a universal struggle. And it's not just about nerves. This seemingly simple question is actually quite complex.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us. What makes this question so tricky?
It's a bit like a conversational chameleon. It blends into any situation, but the answer it demands changes drastically depending on the context. Think about it. You wouldn't answer the same way in a job interview as you would at a casual networking event.
You're right. I'd probably be a lot more formal in a job interview. I wouldn't want to accidentally tell my potential boss about my weekend plans. But how do we actually figure out what information is relevant in each situation?
That's the key, isn't it? It's not just about what you say, but why you're saying it.
Hmm.
Let's say you're at a job interview. Before you even walk into the room, you should be thinking, what are they looking for in a candidate? What skills or experiences would be most relevant to this specific role?
So it's almost like a detective game. We have to gather clues from the job description, the company website, maybe even the interviewer's LinkedIn profile.
Exactly. And once you've gathered those clues, you can tailor your answer to highlight the aspects of your background that best match what they're looking for.
That makes so much sense. But okay, let's say I've done my detective work and I have a good understanding of the context. How do I actually structure my answer? I still feel like I could ramble on for hours.
There's a really useful framework I like to call the past, present, future bridge. Imagine you're taking the listener on a journey. You start by briefly mentioning relevant experiences from your past, maybe your education or a previous job.
Okay, so that's the starting point of the bridge.
Exactly. Then you bring it to the present. What are you doing right now that's connected to the situation? Maybe you're finishing up a degree, volunteering for a relevant organization, or even just exploring different career paths.
Ah, so that's the middle of the bridge. We've moved from the past to the present.
Right. And finally, you connect it to the future.
Yeah.
What are your aspirations? How does this opportunity fit into your long-term goals? This is where you really solidify the connection between your past, your present, and the reason you're having this conversation in the first place.
I love that visual of a bridge. It makes the structure so much clearer. So we've talked about understanding the context and using the past, present, future bridge as a framework. But what about the actual content? I know English Voice Club had some great specific examples.
They did. And their examples highlight how this framework can be adapted to different situations.
Perfect. Let's dive into those examples. I'm ready to see this bridge in action. Let's say I'm in a job interview for, how about a graphic design position?
Great choice.
Yeah.
Now imagine the hiring manager asks you that dreaded question. So tell me about yourself.
Okay, here comes the sweat.
Don't worry. You've got this. Remember, you've already done your research and you know what skills and experiences are most relevant to this role. So you could say something like, I've been working in marketing for the past few years, but as you saw in my CV, my background is actually in graphic design. I'm really passionate about design, and I've been looking for an opportunity to transition back into that field, which is why I was so excited to see this position.
Okay. I see how that follows the bridge structure. You've got the past experience in design, the present situation in marketing, and the future goal of returning to design. And it's all tied together with a clear sense of purpose and direction.
Exactly. It's concise, relevant, and it leaves the interviewer with a strong understanding of who you are and what you're looking for. But now let's shift gears. Imagine you're not in a job interview, but in a university interview for a drama program.
Ooh, a completely different vibe. What kind of story would we tell with our past, present, future bridge in that situation?
Well, in this case, your passion for drama would take center stage. You might say, I've always been fascinated by theater. Ever since I was a kid, I've been drawn to the power of storytelling on stage. For the past few years, I've been actively involved in our school's drama club, both as an actor and as part of the stage crew. I'm really eager to continue exploring my passion for theater at a higher level, and that's why I'm so excited about the possibility of studying drama here.
It's amazing. It paints such a vivid picture of your dedication and enthusiasm for theater, and I love how it highlights your practical experience in the school drama club. It's not just about saying you're passionate, it's about showing it through your actions.
Exactly. And notice how the language is slightly different than in the job interview example. It's still professional, but it also conveys a sense of personal enthusiasm and excitement, which is important in a university setting.
This is fantastic. We've covered job interviews and university applications, but I'm curious about those less formal situations. What about those times when you meet someone new at, say, a language exchange event?
Great question. In those casual settings, the past, present, future bridge is still relevant. but the tone is much more relaxed. You might say something like, I'm originally from Argentina, but I've been living in Tokyo for the past year. I'm currently working as a freelance writer while I study Japanese. I'm really fascinated by Japanese culture, and I'm hoping to eventually write a book about my experiences here.
It's still structured, but it feels much more conversational and personal. And it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like you're trying to impress anyone. You're just sharing a bit about yourself and your interests.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
all about finding that balance between structure and authenticity, no matter the situation.
Okay, this bridge analogy has been a game changer. But what about the actual language we use to build this bridge? Does English Voice Club have any tips on that?
They do. And what's interesting is that they emphasize the power of simple, impactful language. You don't need to use a thesaurus to find the most obscure words.
Hmm.
In fact, being clear and concise is much more effective.
That's reassuring. Because sometimes I get caught up in trying to sound super intellectual and I end up just confusing myself. So, what kind of simple yet impactful language are we talking about?
Well, think back to the examples we've discussed. Did you notice how they used specific phrases to highlight their skills and experiences? For example, instead of saying, I worked at Google, they said, I've been working in the tech industry at Google.
Oh, right. It's like adding a layer of context and professionalism.
Exactly. And it shows you're thinking about the bigger picture, not just your individual role. They also used phrases like transitioning back to or seeking a position that leverages.
Those sound so purposeful and directed.
They are. Transitioning back to implies a deliberate choice to return to a field you're passionate about. And seeking a position that leverages highlights your desire to use your skills in a specific way.
It's amazing how a few well-chosen words can completely change the impact of your message.
It really is. And here's another tip. Don't be afraid to use strong verbs. Instead of saying I was responsible for, try I managed or I spearheaded.
Those verbs definitely pack a punch.
They do. They convey a sense of agency and accomplishment. And speaking of powerful language, let's talk about verb tenses. Did you notice how the examples use different tenses to create a timeline for the listener?
You're right. They use the present perfect continuous tense like I've been working in to talk about ongoing experiences.
Precisely. And they use the simple past tense like I graduated from to describe specific events in the past. And when talking about their future aspirations, they used phrases like I'm hoping to or I'm planning to.
It's like each verb tense has its own role to play in telling the story of who you are.
Exactly. And by using them strategically, you can create a clear and engaging narrative that keeps the listener hooked.
Okay, so we've talked about strong verbs, verb tenses, and using specific phrases to highlight our skills and experiences. Is there anything else we should keep in mind when it comes to the language of self-introduction?
One thing that English Voice Club emphasizes is the importance of practice. Even native English speakers can benefit from practicing their self-introduction, especially in a language learning context.
That makes sense. When I was learning Spanish, I used to practice introducing myself in front of the mirror all the time. It helped me feel more confident and fluent.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more natural and effortless it will sound.
This is all so helpful. But I have to admit, as a native English speaker, I sometimes forget that this question can be even more daunting for people who are learning English as a second or third language.
That's such an important point. And English Voice Club actually addresses this directly in their materials. They offer some fantastic advice for non-native English speakers who are navigating this tricky question.
Okay. I'm really curious to hear this. What kind of advice do they offer?
Well, first and foremost, they emphasize the importance of being kind to yourself. Learning a new language is a challenging journey, and it's okay to make mistakes. In fact, mistakes are a valuable part of the learning process.
That's so true. I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to sound perfect that we forget that it's okay to stumble along the way.
Absolutely. And remember, even native English speakers make mistakes all the time. It's part of what makes language so interesting and dynamic.
So aside from being kind to ourselves, what are some practical tips for non-native English speakers who are preparing to answer, "Tell me about yourself"?
One tip they highlight is to focus on clear, simple language. Don't feel pressured to use complex vocabulary or grammar structures that you're not comfortable with.
That's great advice. It's better to communicate clearly and confidently with simpler language than to get lost in a sea of complicated words and tenses.
Exactly. And if you're feeling unsure about a particular word or phrase, don't be afraid to ask for help. There are so many resources available, whether it's a teacher, a language partner, or even an online dictionary.
Resources are key. I remember when I was learning Spanish, I used to rely heavily on online dictionaries and language exchange apps.
Those can be incredibly helpful. And here's another tip that I think is particularly relevant for non-native speakers. Practice, practice, practice.
Practice makes perfect, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if it's just writing down a few sentences or rehearsing in front of a mirror, practicing your self-introduction beforehand can help you feel more confident and prepared.
I love that. And, speaking of practice, I think we've covered so much ground in this deep dive that our listeners might be feeling overwhelmed with information.
You're right. We've thrown a lot at them. Maybe it's time for a little challenge to help them put all these tips into practice.
I love that idea. What kind of challenge should we give them? All right, listener. I think a challenge is a great way to solidify all this amazing advice we've gotten from English Voice Club.
I agree. So how about this? We challenge you to take everything we've discussed today, the context, the past, present, future bridge, the language tips,
Yeah.
and craft your own tell me about yourself
Yeah.
answer.
I love it. And to make it even more interesting, why not pick a specific scenario? Maybe a dream job interview, a university application, or even just introducing yourself to new colleagues at a work event.
That's a fantastic idea. And once you've crafted your answer, share it with us in the comments. We'd love to see what you come up with.
Yes. We can't wait to read your brilliant self-introductions. But before we unleash you on the world with your newfound confidence, let's talk about one more important element that English Voice Club highlights.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What is it?
It's the power of storytelling. They suggest that even in a short self-introduction, weaving in a concise anecdote or personal detail can make your answer more memorable and engaging.
That's so true. Stories have a way of captivating our attention and making us feel more connected to the speaker. But how do we incorporate storytelling without turning our self-introduction into a novel?
That's a great question. I imagine it's all about being selective and strategic.
Exactly. Choose a story that directly relates to the context and highlights a specific skill or quality you want to showcase. For instance, if you're interviewing for a marketing position and you want to demonstrate your creativity, you might briefly mention a time you came up with an innovative campaign that yielded impressive results.
Okay. So it's not about telling your entire life story. It's about using a short, impactful anecdote to illustrate a point and make a lasting impression.
Precisely. And remember, even in casual settings, a well-placed anecdote can make you more relatable and memorable. For example, if you're introducing yourself at a language exchange event, you might share a funny story about a cultural misunderstanding you experienced. It could be a great icebreaker and a way to connect with others who are also navigating the challenges of language learning.
I love that. It's all about finding those human connection points through storytelling. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more crucial aspect of communication that often gets overlooked.
I'm listening. What is it?
It's tone. The tone of your voice and the words you choose can convey a lot about your personality and how you want to be perceived.
Tone is so important. It's like the invisible layer of communication that can either enhance or undermine your message. For instance, in a job interview, you want to project a tone of confidence and professionalism. But in a more casual setting, you might want to come across as friendly and approachable.
Exactly. So how do we master this tone-shifting magic?
It's a combination of vocal delivery and word choice. For example, if you're aiming for a confident tone, you'll want to speak clearly and at a steady pace, maintaining eye contact and using strong verbs. But if you want to convey a more approachable vibe, you might use a softer tone and incorporate humor or personal anecdotes.
Wow. Tone is like a secret weapon in the art of self-introduction.
It really is. And one final thought on tone. Remember that authenticity is key. Trying to force a tone that doesn't feel genuine will only come across as insincere. So relax, be yourself, and let your natural personality shine through.
I love that. Be yourself because everyone else is already taken. So listener, as we reach the end of our deep dive into the world of tell me about yourself, we hope you're feeling empowered and ready to tackle this question with confidence. Remember, it's not about perfection. It's about connection, authenticity, and sharing your unique story with the world.
Absolutely. And remember, we're here to support you on your language learning journey. So please share your self-introduction stories, your challenges, and your triumphs with us in the comments. We can't wait to hear from you.
Until next time, keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of language.